Good day. My name is Filiberto Penaros, and I'm happy to be presenting along with Limara Rosado the preliminary results of a study that seeks to understand the participation of indigenous peoples in higher education and the factors that affect that participation. This is a study that has been conducted with colleagues from the University of Belize, and it's a regional project. I want to start by a few of the starting points. One, higher education is valued both as a rich cultural and scientific asset for personal development as well as economic, technological, and social change. Higher education, equity and diversity in higher education is a global goal as can be seen from the Sustainable Development Goals. Globally, however, low socioeconomic sectors and regionalized others are disfavored even as mass education has increased. This perpetuates social inequalities and produces epistemic impoverishment. In the context of the region and in Belize, we really don't have a clear understanding of indigenous people's participation, and that's precisely what this project sought to address. It sought to analyze the nature of indigenous participation and the differentiated intersectional barriers and conditions that hinder or help foster their participation. The project was funded by the International Development Research Center, and it's led by CSS Mexico at the region and by Galen University in the context of Belize. So I wanted to share just a few notes on indigenous peoples in Belize. So indigenous peoples of Belize make up 15% of the population, and this is 4% Garifuna, 6.6% Quechua, Mopan 4%, and Yucatec 0.5%. Indigenous peoples are mostly rural, as you can see on the map to the right. And they report high incidences of poverty, both in income measures as well as multidimensional poverty index. So as you can see in the case of the Maya, 77% in income measures and 60.2% in multidimensional indices of poverty. In terms of higher education in Belize, we are talking about anything above an associate's degree. Now, the system includes 11 junior colleges and 4 universities. These are concentrated in urban centers in central and northern Belize. You should note that there's only one of these centers in Toledo, which has the highest concentration of indigenous peoples. The map to the right shows you kind of where our centers are located. The other important thing to know about higher education is that there has been a decline in expenditure in higher education, even as population has been increasing. So 14%, for example, in 2011 to 8.6% in 2021. What do we know in terms of participation? The census conducted by SIB observes over the last 20 or so years, 30 years, that there has been an increase in higher education attainment. So people with a higher education degree from 1991, 3.58 to 14.4 kind of at the national level. Among indigenous peoples, the Garifuna people have consistently been performing above the national average. The Quechua people have been extremely underrepresented, and the Maya people in general are below national average.
Okay, in terms of methodology. So the University of Belize, being the largest university and being one of the few that collects data on ethnicity, was used as a representative measure. Both secondary and primary data was collected from UB, and secondary data was collected in the form of anonymous student records recording indigenous participation from 2000 to 2024. Digital surveys and focus groups were also conducted at various higher institutions, including the University of Belize, and the Statistical Institute of Belize labor surveys and census data was all used. Overall, all of these methods were used to paint a picture of indigenous participation in higher education. Notably, there is currently no national system to effectively track higher education by ethnicity. Not all higher education institutions collect data on ethnicity, and the Tertiary Education Management Information System, which collects information from all tertiary education institutions, does not currently gather data on ethnicity. Where information is gathered, categories are inconsistent. So, for example, the Statistical Institute of Belize conflates all 3 Maya categories into one overall Maya category. And the University of Belize, while it identifies a Quechua category, it conflates the Mapan and the Yucatec group as one and that is labeled as the Maya. So that was our first finding. Then we looked at enrollment at the University of Belize. And when we look at enrollment at the University of Belize, at a glance, we see that there has been growth from 2000 to 2024. But we wanted to explore this further. And so we found that there are 4 significant periods of change. The first is 2000 to 2010, where we see notably growth across the board for the Maya group. Here we had to use one category for Maya for all groups, and then we had a Garifuna category. And so we see growth overall for Indigenous groups, and we see for non-Indigenous groups as well. Now, after 2010, we see a strong decline, in particular for the Garifuna group, and they do not recover from this. Then we see some changes from 2014 approximately to 2019. Specifically, we looked at the period 2016 to 2019, where we see an upward trend. This is particularly true for the Maya group, all the way up to COVID. So 2020, 2019, 2020, and then we see a dip. And we see a dip for the non-Indigenous group as well. But interestingly, from 2020 to 2021, we see an increase for the Garifuna group. Now, notably, post-2021, we see a very sharp decline once again, and there is no recovery, to date from this. Now, what we noted in terms of the gender here is that males were most affected by this decline post-COVID. So it was statistically significant for males, this decline, and that is something to note. Now, across the board, we note that female participation tends to be better than male participation. So the solid lines here are female and the broken lines here are male. And you can see that within the Maya group in particular, we see some greater participation for females than males. However, the significance of this difference, it's not very large. And then the males here are affected post-COVID for the Garifuna group. Now, we note that there is a closing of the enrollment gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups currently at this point. And this is largely due to the Garifuna group participation declining. And then for the Kechi, there is enrollment that is increasing. And there's also decrease for the Mopan Yucatec group labeled as Maya. But the Kechi group is notably increasing. And we noted this specifically from 2016 onwards, that there has been an increase in female participation. However, I want to note that while we see these visually, the Kechi growth is still not statistically significant. Now, moving on to graduation rates. So notably, in the early 2010s, Indigenous students had significantly higher graduation rates than their non-Indigenous peers. And once again, this is largely due to the Garifuna students and Garifuna participation. However, by 2021 to 2023, this disadvantage disappears. And like I said, we have a sharp dip in overall Garifuna participation. Now, Maya students saw a marginal decline, and they kept enrolling at steady rates, but have lower graduation rates compared to other groups. And overall, once again, the females significantly outperform males across all ethnicities, and we noted this throughout all of our analyses. Now, when we looked at graduation, we also attempted to look at dropping out, administrative termination, and notably administrative termination, that is the university's removal of a student from the system following non-attendance over an academic year, and that's 2 semesters, remains the most common outcome for both non-Indigenous and Indigenous groups. So nearly 40% of students are not completing their program. Notably, this includes students who might have never shown up at the university after being accepted. Now, moving on to the survey results. So here we looked at the University of Belize, Galen University, and other junior colleges that participated. And we found that approximately 40.8% live away from home to attend university, and a significant amount of them originate from rural communities. Among the students living away from home, the most common challenge identified was financial strain, followed by feeling isolated or disconnected, and homesickness. There were also other psychosocial challenges, such as difficulty adjusting to urban life, culture shock, difficulty maintaining cultural practices, and an overall lack of emotional support from family and friends. Now, the challenges identified by enrolled students were once again reflected by those who considered dropping out. So 37.8% had considered dropping out, with the top reasons for this consideration being financial strain, health and stress, family responsibilities, and work responsibilities. Now, we also noted that family obligations further compounded these stressors, with 40.8% of students spending a significant amount of time on household chores, and 33.7% providing childcare or some of financial support, either being the main financial provider in the home or financially contributing in some other manner.
So what are some of the key findings? One, there's an absence of a coherent national tracking system and uneven data quality. Two, there's an absence of disaggregation, which hides important differences because each group faces different challenges. Three, we notice that enrollment has grown over the years, but the rate of growth has varied over time and has slowed down. Four, participation has been uneven. Females are doing better than males. Garifuna people are doing best, but their achievement is threatened by males lagging behind. The Kekchi are doing the worst. Five, there's uneven attainment as reflected by graduation rates. Indigenous peoples' graduation rates have declined. Non-Indigenous people graduation rates have moderately improved. The Garifuna again do the best, and the Kekchi on the opposite side, they are doing the worst. Again, females seem to do better than males in terms of graduation rates. The key challenges for Indigenous peoples attending university seem to be financial and psychosocial. So what are some of the conclusions that we can draw from this? Well, we can conclude that Indigenous peoples are participating differently in higher education. As pointed out already, the Garifuna people have generally outperformed everyone, but they are at risk of losing that advantage, particularly for males, which means that whatever policies are designed have to respond to this reality. B, the Kekchi have the lowest higher education participation, which is likely related to the fact that they are among the poorest and farthest away from opportunities for higher education. They're likely to be among those affected by financial and psychosocial challenges, given that they are the most rural. Overall, this means that they are not accessing a resource that could potentially contribute to overcoming poverty. Two, without interventions, these trends may persist. And this is something that's concerning given state investment in higher education has been declining. Three, without tracking, there's an inability to develop effective policies and interventions both at the national and institutional levels. Thank you.